going on, everybody? Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Viall Files. I am your host, Nick, joined by the team of Allie and Amanda. How you ladies doing?
Just dandy. I had a lovely little staycation at your place with Jeff.
Yes.
It was a good weekend.
After having the SWAT team overtake your house.
Yeah. Yours seemed like a safer bet.
Yeah.
I'm very well. Fresh off of a trip to San Francisco.
You were in San Francisco?
I was in San Francisco and it was magical.
Did you take your lady friend or was it to visit other friends?
No, it was to visit other friends, but I was texting the lady friend and she loves San Francisco. There was a little bit of talk of like, maybe we should go back together sometime.
Planning a trip. Yep. All right.
You know, it's the seeds are being planted.
Okay. Well, we have a really fun episode for you today. Dr. Diane Strachowski.
Yes.
Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
We just like to call her Dr. Diane. She is back with us today. Dr. Diane was on our podcast, our Bachelorette Recap podcast, breaking down the finale of Katie's season. And I invited Dr. Diane back because we're all talking about Taylor Swift's new song. It is inspiring. It's beautiful music. All Too Well. Do we call it? It's a ballad. No, it's 10 minutes.
Well, it's technically a short film.
Oh, it's a short film.
Well, it's a 10-minute song, but the 15-minute video is qualified as a short film.
And everyone's talking about it. It's a great song, as we mentioned. Just a heads up, it's all Swifties in this room. I'm a big Taylor Swift fan. I had the pleasure of meeting her once. We have a mutual friend. She was incredibly sweet, nice, and normal. And I say normal because she has a godlike presence. And if she wasn't normal, we'd be like, totally makes sense.
Checks out.
Check that. But she was, again, a brief interaction with her, just super down to earth. And I was like, oh my God, Taylor Swift's so chill and nice and cool. And she is made a career out of being incredibly in touch with her feelings and empathetic, and is a beautiful songwriter to the point where everyone finds it so relatable, and that's kind of her gift. And she connects with us and we feel seen and heard by listening to Taylor Swift. And she released this longer version of this song, All Too Well. And in the music video, and by the way, if you haven't seen the music video and you listen to this podcast, you should hit pause. You should go to YouTube. You should Google Taylor's version of All Too Well, and you should watch the 10-minute video, because what we decided to do is recap the fight that was in this video. And I thought the reason why we should do that with Dr. Diane is because, we talk a lot about relationships and dating in this podcast. And it is my belief and hope and goal that the people who listen to the show, and just the world in general when it comes to love and dating, is there's certainly plenty of bad apples out there, but I do believe that we have men and women, gay, straight, we want to figure out love and dating and relationships. We're optimistic about finding our person, and we want to have these healthy relationships, and yet we often get it wrong. We find fights are a part of any relationship, even healthy ones. Early on in dating, we have the best intentions often, and we look back on our relationships and we make a lot of mistakes. We have become more enlightened in the past few years, learning about communication styles, attachment styles, which I'm sure we'll talk about today, which you graced us a little bit when you were on the podcast last time. And we're learning all this new information, but we're also learning at such a speed that we're also misusing a lot of these terms. And with our desire to become enlightened, I think we're kind of screwing up. Obviously, I've been talking a lot about people misdefining terms like gaslighting, love bombing, stonewalling, narcissism. It's like the internet walked around and started handing out simple, basic definitions of these words. And we're just like, oh, cool. And we're going to try to take this new tool that we have, this information, and go around and being like, well, all right, here are your definitions. Now walk the earth and point out anytime you see this, almost to the detriment, I think, of relationships, because I think it's become a distraction. I don't think we are intending to for most people, but sometimes I think it's become a weapon that we're now using. I want to break this episode down as how can we watch this fight, which I think is a very relatable fight. Relatable in the sense that if we're just looking at what we see, not necessarily, we're not going to like assume, Taylor and obviously the Jake Gyllenhaal part. We're just going to take this fight as like a case study of what we know watching the fight, right? And, what can we take away from it? What can we learn about these situations? Because this is a fight of what seems like two people who are not understanding each other, not empathizing. It seems like one person feels a little bit ignored, invalidated, not maybe getting met their emotional infection. The other person almost seems like they almost might feel like they can't get it right, or maybe they just don't feel as strongly as them and feel guilty for that, and they're responding in a toxic way. So how can we watch this? How can we kind of humble ourselves to point out things that we have done in relationships? And then how can we use this video to say, well, next time I find myself in this situation, what would Dr. Diane tell me to do? And I think that's our hope of this episode. Did I set up some appropriate upfront expectations? Because this is not about determining whether Jake Gyllenhaal gaslit Taylor Swift. Like, that's not our goal today. We don't know. We're just going to try to understand this episode and fight, and all be better lovers and partners for it.
I think we can just call them Sadie and Dylan.
Let's just call them Sadie and Dylan.
Yeah.
Great.
That way we just neutralize it.
Do you want to break down the fight first, and then we can, on a more macro level, talk about like redefining again? I think it's always a good reminder. Let's redefine gaslighting.
Yes.
Let's understand it. I'd love to have a discussion about, what is it about our society that has taken these terms and adopted them to mean something slightly different than what it was originally meant, because people seem to be connecting with some of these moments as a way to articulate a feeling. But at the same time, is it still dangerous to casually define things, especially when these very things happen? Like gaslighting is a form of abuse. It happens in these extreme cases, and there's a reason why that's there. So how do we still identify these feelings while still not necessarily blurring the lines between something that is abuse and something that is maybe feeling invalidated?
I think, Nick, before we even get to the fight, we need to talk a little bit about what comes before that.
Okay.
Because here, the way the story plays out, right? She leaves her scarf. Clearly, this relationship is moving fast, you would say, right? She meets the family. She feels this sense of home, comfort. They're upstate New York having this amazing time. The wind's blowing in her hair. We already see a snag because he gets out of the car, throws the keys, right? He's already yelling on the phone with someone else. I don't know who that is.
Yeah, like he's just mad.
Right. So then we get to the fight. And yes, the lead up is here. Suddenly she feels very young. She's the youngest person in the room. Everyone's chatting. They're catching up on 10 years worth, right? So clearly that makes her feel insecure. She goes to touch his hand. He drops her hand. You can just see her sink. I mean, and we've all been in that moment where your heart just sinks. And so then we find them in the kitchen. And in the kitchen, then he says, "You're acting pouty."
Yeah, like
Right.
there's a vibe where I think we've been in these fights for like, you're both, either one of you is mad and the other person knows it, or you're both mad and you're just like, who's going to bring it up? We've all been there.
Totally.
Right?
The pre-fight standoff.
Yeah, it's like this weird game of chicken, and you feel, and when your partner's mad at you, there's a natural feeling of defensiveness, right? And then maybe you're just like, and in that situation, is it possible too? Because what we're seeing in this general fight, right, too, and we talked about this last night, I think one of the most common relationship problems, and you would know better than anyone dealing with, couples, is that often in relationships where there's problems, one person feels invalidated or unloved, and the other person feels
Flooded.
Yes, like overwhelmed by the expectations of their partner, and they're doing their best version of that, and the other person thinks that can't be possible, that this is your best?
I think Sadie is emotionally triggered, and I think Dylan is getting flooded. And he is saying, this is too much for me.
Because that's my big question too when it comes to gaslighting. Like, what is the definition? And then where I'm confused still is that, like, what we learned from Dr. Solomon, and I've talked with Darlene about it and talked with you about it, is this very specific thing that came from this playwright, of this kind of perpetuated, systematic, ongoing, deliberate attempt at manipulation, changing someone's reality. And where I'm confused, and I'm hoping you again can clear the air, and is like, people are out there on the internet talking about signs of gaslighting, right? Like symptoms, like, hey, when you like, I think I have a cold, and you Google symptoms, and you're like, oh well, shit, I guess I got it. One thing I see a lot is people saying things like, well, I don't really know how to define it, but this is a sign of gaslighting.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that gaslighting, it can't just be like a one-off thing someone says, because it has to be like this perpetual ongoing thing. And it seems like a lot of people out there will see an example of gaslighting, like when this Dylan guy says something like, oh, we were having fun until you fucked it up, or something like that, which is like a dick thing to say, and certainly could be used as a way to manipulate your partner. But does that, you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
I want to break down the 5 ways, because I think that'll be helpful, because I think 2 things were actually happening in this kitchen scene. So definition of what gaslighting actually is, if you want to break it down: countering. The abusive person questions the memory of the other person, like you're making this up. Withholding, pretends not to understand. Forgetting. An abusive person might deny something. Trivializing, and that's what I think is happening here. That you minimize the other person's concern, seeing them as unimportant or irrational, or you can divert, changing the subject. Those are the 2 things. Now, again, we're painting a picture of what happened even earlier. Sadie clearly, as I said, in my mind, has a anxious attachment style. She needs a lot of validation, to your point. She needs to feel important. Why she's triggered in that moment? Because she feels like her partner has abandoned her. And that's oftentimes a wound that an anxiously attached person feels. So they interpret the situation as an abandonment. That's an old wound for them, as opposed to he was just preoccupied with his friends. And then we could talk about how you might handle this in a relationship if this is you.
That's, I think our hope is that we can watch this and say, here's how people might be feeling. Can you relate in these situations? And then what would you recommend a more productive way? Like, if you feel, say, triggered, like you feel ignored by your partner.
Yes.
And you feel like, and you're frustrated by that. They didn't hold your hand. They didn't show you PDA. They gave more attention to your friends, coworkers, etc. What's the best way to articulate that? And then also on the flip side, when you feel attacked by your partner and you feel defensive, well, how should we better appropriately handle that, as opposed to doing what Dylan did? Should we accept the term of gaslight? Because which is also interesting, it's not in the diagnostic manual.
It's not in the DSM, no. We're overusing it too much to use it as a feeling. It is classically meant that a narcissist, and in the cycle of narcissistic abuse, that also includes like love bombing, and then you devalue and you discard your person, and then you sort of hover. And classically, gaslighting came into this idea of narcissistic abuse.
Sure.
So in this moment, sure, there's a smattering of trivializing and diverting.
Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of it in this fight. When I watch the fight, I feel like I've been Sadie, where I'm just like, why did you act that way? Why did you treat me this way? Why did you that seemed rude. We were around these people, and why did you say that? I feel uncomfortable. And then I've expressed that to partners in the past. I also feel like I've been on Dylan's side of the feeling, where it's just like, as somebody who I know I have been aloof and not present, I've been called out by partners and appropriately so been called out, but also I've been attacked by partners where they start yelling at me and I've gotten defensive and I've been like, what are you talking about?
Sure. And so we have to look at this in the pattern of the relationship, right? If he's doing this all the time, and so there's gradations. What I want to say, if you see one person they're a great person otherwise, treating you really well, and then one time they're preoccupied with their friends and they don't treat you well, but then they repair it. So here's to Dylan's point. He does come and say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And then she says, there's nothing else for me to do here. And then they kind of move on and we see their love story going on. But we know that this was the beginning of the crack, as she called it, right? There's chapters in this short film, and that was the first crack. And I do believe that it was at that point, too, that Dylan got flooded by Sadie, like, oh, shit. He says it, oh, shit. Now this. Yeah. That I'm held hostage. So he said a couple things. First, the trivializing part. I'm not making you feel that way. You're feeling that way. That was triggering for people to watch. And then he said, now you're holding me hostage. And he was calling her selfish. Versus, and now Sadie's not without fault here. She was also emotional and yes, could have done a better job. But basically she said, you treated me differently. So to me, there's an emotional imbalance here. That she's saying you treated me differently, and he's going off saying you're selfish and you're emotional, and how dare you kind of do this to me, hold me hostage. So that felt like a higher weight.
What do you mean?
Meaning that if we're comparing the two, she's clearly emotional, but also she's clearly more invested. I mean, as it plays out, right, we see that Sadie, there's an emotional imbalance because she's fallen for him harder than he's fallen for her.
Yeah, it seems like
he doesn't love
Sadie's
her the
more
same
in love
way.
with Dylan.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Storyworth. That's right. Give the gift of a great story to your loved ones. Encapsulate those memories inside a perfectly formatted book with Storyworth. Makes a great gift for all your loved ones. I gave it to my dad for Father's Day, and boy, did he appreciate it. I grew up loving to hear my parents talk about stories about their childhood and their experience with their parents, and same with my grandparents. And it really is really cool to take those stories and make them into a keepsake that we could be passed down over and over. Storyworth is an online service that helps you and your loved ones preserve precious memories and stories for years to come. It is a thoughtful and meaningful gift that connects you to those that matter most. Each and every week, Storyworth emails your relatives or friend a thought-provoking question of your choice for their vast pool of possible options. From their vast pool of possible options, each unique prompt asks a question you've never thought to ask, like, what was the bravest thing you've ever done in your life? Or if you could see into the future, what would you want to find out? Some fascinating things you can learn about the people you think you know the most, but maybe you don't. And there's so much more to learn about the people you've been living with your entire life. After 1 year, Storyworth will compile all your loved ones' stories, including photos, into a beautiful keepsake book that you will be able to share and revisit for generations to come. With Storyworth, I am giving those I love the most a thoughtful, personal gift from the heart and preserving their memories and stories for years to come. Go to storyworth.com/VIALL and save $10 on your first purchase. That's storyworth.com/VIALL to save $10 off your first purchase. Masterclass. Be a master, take a class. The holidays are fast approaching, and it's always hard to find new and unique gifts to people, especially the people you think they can have anything they want. But knowledge is power, and give them the gift of learning literally anything they want to learn from the people who know how to do it the best. That's right, Masterclass. Whether it's dog training, cooking, photography, movie making, skateboarding like Tony Hawk or Martin Scorsese. Shonda Rhimes teaches writing for televisions. Gordon Ramsay teaches cooking. I mean, Gordon Ramsay taught me how to cook a steak from Masterclass. And I'll tell you what, when I cook a steak now for my friends, they stop, they look at me and go, wow. Anyways, it makes a great gift. You can get their entire catalog for yourself and for a loved one. I gave it to my brother-in-law for Christmas. He doesn't shut up about he thinks I like him now. I'm kidding. He's great. It can be enjoyed on your phone, your desktop computer, iOS, Android, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, and Roku. Certainly, you can really just enjoy it anywhere. I find it to be enjoyable when I'm traveling. This holiday, give one annual membership and get one free. Go to masterclass.com/VIALL today. That's masterclass.com/VIALL. Terms apply. But I'm assuming like in early relationships, that's a common thing, right? To like two people meet, you're dating for a couple months. one person could be really excited. The other person could be, I really like this person. They're great, but like, I don't know.
Just a little slower.
And that could be for a variety of reasons. Could be maybe they got out of a relationship and they're still like slowly, they're excited. They're capable of dating, but just a little bit more reserved because maybe they fell hard the last time, et cetera, or who knows, And so how do we deal with that? I guess what I'm I'd love to have these tools provided by you is because all these little moments that we're like talking about, they're so relatable in terms of the disconnect between, it's really just all these moments, it seems like, are expectation versus reality. In relationships, we have an expectation of ourselves and our partners, and then we have the reality of the situation. And our expectations aren't matching our reality. And we sometimes try to force it like square peg round hole. And we do it in a way that doesn't work.
And in a more ideal world, Sadie would have also calmed down first. Because the problem here is when you're triggered, you are emotionally charged. Mm-hmm. Okay, she's upset, he's upset, nothing good comes of that. We actually have studies that say that we can predict with accuracy couples that break up because their blood pressure gets up too high, over 100 beats per minute without exercising. And John Gottman has done studies to predict couples. If they do that very often, they're more likely to break up.
Is that a personality thing or is that a compatibility thing?
It's more that you both are triggering each other.
So anyone could be anyone, because we've met people who seem to be more reactionary than others.
Sure.
Does that play a role, or is it just...
So it does come back to your attachment style.
Okay.
Because Sadie is the more anxiously attached person, everything has more meaning, more weight. She's hanging on his every word, his every look, what he does or doesn't do. I do believe, again, he got flooded by her in that moment, and you can start to see him shutting down, thinking, is this what I'm signing up for longer term? And then later, eventually, he breaks up with her. Mm-hmm. If a more perfect world, in that moment, Sadie would say, I felt really lonely. I know you didn't mean to. You were preoccupied with your friends, but if that were to happen again, it would mean a lot to me if you held my hand.
Yeah.
If you put your arm around me, if you talked about us. Because she also says in the song, you kept me like a secret. Yeah. I kept you like an oath, right? There's a difference.
There's good context also with, sources have said that she was like planning on saving herself for marriage and then like really thought she was going to marry him. So they like slept together. That was the first time she had ever slept with anyone. And I feel like that line might've been hinting at that because like for her, it meant so much. And she was like, that was an oath. And like It was, and he was kind of just like had this little girl on the side. Like that's what a secret feels like to me.
I'm curious with you, like often in early relationships, people are dating and some people are like, one night you have a great date, call on mom and be like, I had an amazing date. And other people are, we'll see. We're slow to tell friends. How much does that play a role early on in dating where again, expectation versus reality. You want the other person to be just as excited as you, but they don't. It feels like they keep you a secret because...
That is my advice to every anxious person. I call her Nervous Nora. And she's like 46% of the population. I'm just going to throw out there.
This is just like a general Nervous Nora is anyone who has an
anxious attachment style.
46%.
46% according to my quiz data, which I think is what happens. And so I say, slow your roll, girl. You have to calm down. It's okay to like him, but take a wait and see approach. And yes, I did thought she probably lost her virginity. I didn't know if that was confirmed or not, but all the red too, the red scarf and the red mug and the red lipstick. There were lots of, again, metaphors to that. So clearly your first love is a big deal.
Oh my God.
It's a huge deal.
So hard to get over.
And she kept saying, we'll remember this. And she's just clearly hurt that it didn't mean the same to him as it meant to her. And then I think talking about ghosting, then as we move the story along, then he doesn't show up for her birthday. And I think the rest of the story to me felt...
Were they still dating on her birthday?
So they broke up I think, early December. Her birthday is December 13th.
Yes.
So I think there was potentially an expectation that he would come, which is what the song The Moment I Knew is about, because she just stood around like waiting for him and then ended up crying at her birthday because he never showed up. But in the song The Moment I Knew, everyone was asking where he was. So clearly people either still thought they were together, or there was like, they were still clearly ending things.
So in a more perfect world, also Dylan would have said, you're flooding me right now. This is too much. I feel like you're ahead of me. And that's why a lot of people do ghost. And I think it's important, if we just look at dating trends, that let's say he's the avoidant person. I don't know this for sure, but he needs something different. He needs space, peace, distance, quiet, respect. She needs love, validation, acknowledgement, closeness. So they have competing needs. And these are the majority of couples I see. He didn't ask for space. He broke up with her because oftentimes this is the case. The avoidant person feels the pressure or the weight of the relationship is on them. And if I'm not vibing you the same way, and I can see that you are so in love with me, it makes me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, it almost seems like people will say, this is only going to end with me hurting you.
That's right.
I'm just going to break up with you now. Even if I'm hurting you now, it's less hurt than what it's going to be. And I don't know how to deal with that.
That's right. And it felt cruel to her, right? She said it was a cruel breakup. And then the only thing he could say is, well, it's your age. Because he didn't have the words or the language for it. And oftentimes, this is when I work with people, oftentimes men who have the more avoidant stance, because boys are less likely to be raised in a more emotional kind of home. And so he doesn't have the words for it to talk about how to be vulnerable, how to stay in it. Because the 3-month mark, which is also significant in a dating relationship, usually it is about month 3 or 4 where you really do decide, are we going to go for it or not? Mm-hmm. And I think that was the stress point. That's what we talk about in attachment styles. It's the boiling point where you start to see differences. She needed something different than he needed. And that's really what happened here. And then she didn't get the closure, in my mind, and hence that's why she reels from it and why it's so difficult, because she's also given up so much of herself for him.
Yeah.
And then she takes that energy and writes it in her book.
I always get asked, it's like, why did he or she say this when we broke up? What did it mean? Or things like that. And it's just like, it was the heat of the moment. When you're trying to break up with someone, you're trying to like get out of a situation, and for the most time, try not to hurt them, knowing that you are hurting them with the action of breaking up. So we often say things we don't even know what we're saying or mean. And not that that's okay, but we, in the receiving end, need to be careful putting so much weight on what's said in the breakup as to why it broke up, because we're going to reassess. I'm assuming Sadie, Taylor, whatever. Again, she wrote a song 10 years ago. I'm guessing Taylor has answered a lot of her own questions as an adult.
Absolutely.
Right? Like,
and I think personally, we put too much emphasis on closure. Closure is not something that you're going to get from this person. You give it to yourself.
Yeah.
You say, I learned something from this. Part of the question is, how did you get so ahead of yourself? So taking responsibility for your own part of it. How did you wrap yourself around this story of this emotionally unavailable person and get, again, so wrapped up so quickly? And I think that's the ownership that we can learn after the fact and say, well, I need to work on this in the future because that's my pattern of attaching too quickly.
Another question I want to ask you about, a lot of times we hear in, let's say, toxic relationships. Mm-hmm. And would you say that there's a difference between relationships that have toxicity and relationships that are just straight up abusive, right? Because I think we've all said or things that we recognize, like, that was not, that was toxic. Like that, I was being toxic in that moment. Is that
That's
accurate?
Right. And it's the same thing with, how do we define narcissism as a personality trait? Because it is diagnosable. And that's a pervasive way of being versus what is narcissistic behavior.
Yeah. Like what is being selfish? Like
That's
what
right.
is being self-consumed in this moment where you're like, oh my God, for 3 months, I was like, all I cared about was me. Why don't, and like we have these we do that sometimes.
Sure. And so we're all on a continuum. But if this is happening for you and you're a young woman and you have your boyfriend who's done this, you approach him the first time with goodwill. Honey, I know you love me, but you were preoccupied. What I need from you next time. Now, progress that. If he is truly a narcissist, he's going to dismiss that. He's going to say, what are you talking about? He's not going to take that feedback in, and then it's going to continue. So that's what you're talking about, more abusive, and that might even lead to domestic violence, where the person is being physically, emotionally abused. So it's all a range. You might be toxic once, you might have acted out in a toxic way, but that doesn't mean you're a toxic person or an abusive person.
Sure, yeah.
And so we're differentiating that.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like, as we learn these terms, we're identifying these things. And it's so easy to see when it's happening to us, hard to see when we're not looking in the mirror.
Right.
Oftentimes in these relationships, people will say they'll feel stuck.
Yes.
We will recognize these patterns in our partners, and we all did the kind of I wanted to fix them. This has been going on for a while. But how do we determine the right time to get out? Because people will talk like they're stuck, or let's say if you are dating an actual person, are there people who are a person who's narcissistic? Are there people who, like, what role and responsibility is it on us in a relationship where are we fighting too much, I guess, versus calling it stuck as if we don't actually have ability to say, this isn't healthy for me. I need to remove myself. I need to leave. Michelle in The Bachelorette, you haven't seen the episode, she literally talks about how she was getting physically sick, and until the relationship ended and she removed herself, that she started feeling better. She didn't say she couldn't get out, that she almost implied that she was just trying so hard to make it work.
So here's the classic thing. The anxiously attached person usually has a parent who's available, sometimes not other. They learn the habit of working hard. And if that's me, I learned that this is love. So I got to get in there. I got to fix you. I got to try harder. And if I love them more, if I love them through it, they'll turn around. But what you have to do is stay conscious, your head, heart, and mind. Have a journal. I tell everyone, one of the best advice pieces, you're dating, write it down in your journal. Your journal doesn't lie. You have that weird feeling afterwards of a situation, go back and read it and reread it. Look for patterns, not just one-time behaviors, but if you're starting to feel like you're losing yourself, if you're starting to feel like this person is holding power over you and your life is getting smaller and you're feeling bad about yourself, that's time to get out.
Yeah.
Those are signs to say, this is not healthy. This is not making me a better person. I don't feel good about myself. I feel like I've kind of lost myself. Losing yourself is another sign. And people can also get into, again, people pleasing. So
I don't feel you start saying to yourself, you don't recognize the person
that's
you're
right.
being. Yeah.
And a big part of it is fear of being alone. So how can people get better about this? Recognize that I'm okay on my own. Recognize that I would rather be empowered. And I think that's the positive story about here, Taylor being empowered to say, I made something. This is like her redemption song. And she's saying, I'm not going to let this control me anymore.
Yeah.
So the same thing for any single woman to say, I have to decide and be in a good place myself to welcome love in. But if it's getting ugly and I'm losing myself, I'm going too fast, I'm getting too attached and my self-esteem is going down, this is not healthy for me. You don't want that for the long term.
And you more women tend to be anxious attached?
Yes. Well, so it's 46%. Then we have some who are also avoidant women. It's your family of origin is what sets the tone for how you will.
The way you describe it, I would guess I would more anxious attached. And I feel like I get it from my mom. Do you have an opinion on this from a little bit you might know?
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, you love easily. You love to love. You fall for people. We talked about that in your experience.
And that fighter mentality. Like early in my relationships, I was the fixer.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, you can break up with me again. I'll just let me know what I could fix.
And Nick, I'm the same.
Yeah.
So I can totally relate. And my dad was a little more
certainly
avoidant.
Younger me.
Yeah, and my mom was certainly anxious. And so we pick this up from our parents. We do, just because we have hundreds of thousands of experiences with them, it's going to imprint on us. And so therefore, if I want to heal if I want to heal in a good relationship, I'm going to need to heal myself, my nervous system, my nervous mindset. my nervous behaviors. And then I need to also connect with my partner because the partner is half. And when you talked earlier about what could be some techniques, I'll give you a technique that people can use for couples. It's called leveling. In every relationship, there's a person who's complaining, right? Sadie is the one here complaining louder. But Dylan also had his own complaints.
Sure.
And if I was a therapist working with them, I would actually need to bring out both of them because what happens is the imbalance. The person who has the complaint is like higher up in some ways. And the other person feels like my feelings are invalidated here also because I don't have equal weight, equal footing with this.
Yeah, I feel like that's a very relatable feeling
Yes.
for everyone. I mean, yeah.
So as therapists, we also want to connect with the person who's not bringing forward the issue because I know that there's something going on there. And it actually helps the person. If I'm Sadie and I have all these issues, if I hear from Dylan that he has issues too, I actually feel relaxed more.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It levels me out.
Because I also feel like, again, in most of these cases, we're talking about people who like have the best intentions. They're like, oh, like I want to, especially how many young couples were just like, oh, why can't we just get back to when we're so in love, right? Because it's the honeymoon phase. You haven't really dug deep or haven't hung out with each other long enough to know each other, but then you start doing and you're trying to find that thing. And that does make a lot of sense where it's just like, okay, it's not just me frustrated, you're frustrated. So now, that makes a lot of sense.
And so if I approached my partner and I said, you know what? You're really scared about moving in or you're really scared taking this next step. So am I. You see, I approach it and I give you space to actually feel ambivalence. But if I, as a lot of women do, I'm certain you're the one, I know, and you don't, if you don't think that I'm the one, and then where's the man to go with that? So if we can approach it with, I'm scared too, and I'm not so certain, how about we figure it out together? You see, that opens up a whole other world for this relationship to feel like it gets on some equal playing ground to actually then build a foundation. So my encouragement to women is recognize that you might be super excited, but use a wait and see, and then give your partner some space to feel ambiguous because ambiguity is actually more common than people think. At all stages of a relationship, you could be going along, courting, but then you feel ambiguous. This is a big question. I don't know.
I feel like nowadays that's more and more common.
Of course, people court and date for longer now than ever.
We're like super like vague about like defining a relationship and who we're dating and if we have a defined relationship, do we talk about it? Like I think vagueness and ambiguity has become the new norm.
And here's the other thing. We have like the define the relationship talk, usually, who are we? But then what happens is you end up in this limbo phase where you're together for a long time and now you need to define the future. It's like, now I need to talk about, okay, what are the next stages and how do we move this along? But I think there's healthy relationships. Back to the point, people have to have hope, right? There's healthy relationships. Secure people don't usually love bomb. They don't need to come on so strong. Oftentimes people who are insecure will act out in these ways. So if we take all the terms, ghosting, gaslighting, stonewalling, and we put those in context, they're more likely to be done by an insecure person.
But we all at times can be insecure,
That's right?
So then,
That's right.
Like you said, there's a spectrum of times it might come up. What is love bombing? What is stonewalling? Again, I think these are more terms that are thrown out. And then again, like after you define love bombing, what's the difference between being excited and getting carried away with your feelings versus someone who's being manipulative and potentially abusive with their love bombing?
Absolutely. So I give a classic example of love bombing and I use myself as an example. So I met this guy once, Nick, met him out once for coffee. We hit it off and then he was taking a trip. He sent me 24 roses every day for a week at my office.
It's a lot.
A lot. But at first, right, you're flattered. The woman's like, oh my God, this is like so amazing. Yeah. He sent me roses, right? But then what's underneath the behavior, like look at the thorns, what was underneath that behavior was to get me into a relationship quickly. So he had 2 children and he traveled a lot. And I suddenly became like the nanny. I was suddenly like in this relationship because Oftentimes, love bombing is about progressing the relationship unnaturally fast.
So it almost comes with a price.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So the price has a tag, and the tag is, I want you. The insecure person doesn't want you to have to be ambivalent with them. They want to get to a commitment quickly. And if I give you lots of gifts and I shower you and I tell you you're the one right away, I'm going to hook you quicker. So I don't have to feel the ambivalence from you.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And before you know it, then I'm in this relationship with this person, and suddenly I'm like, well, that honeymoon period lasted very short.
Yeah.
And love bombing can also come at later stages too. Someone says, I'm uncomfortable with everything you're doing. I break up with you, and then you love bomb me after the fact. You start sending me gifts.
But the big takeaway, it comes, you will probably, if you're being love bombed, if you're paying attention, it sounds like you will quickly find out what that cost of that action
Absolutely.
is.
That's right.
If you pay attention, you really, getting back together, moving in, whatever that stage of relationship, it comes with a cost.
Yes.
As opposed to maybe someone who meets you, you're super excited, they find themselves to be a romantic, and someone asked me, what's the difference? And I took a unprofessional stab at answering the question and said, well, if someone gets excited, that person should be able, when you check them, saying, hey, well, we just met, I want to take it slow, they would recognize the speed at which, oh yes, I know I'm getting carried away. I'm just excited.
That's exactly right.
And kind of humble themselves. The love bomber might try to suggest that reality doesn't apply to them. They will justify it. They will make you feel bad for questioning their intention.
That's right.
And then ask for the thing they wanted all the time.
So if they're a narcissist who's love bombing you, then they are, again, going to be devaluing you, kind of disregarding you, and then hovering. So that falls in the spectrum, which is, I want to hook, I want to get you locked in quickly. And then when you give me feedback, I can't tolerate that, because Narcissus, who is a Greek god, fell in love with his own image, and he can't handle feedback. Remember, the narcissist actually lacks empathy, which is a whole different thing. I mean, it's like this person, and emotional people, anxiously attached people, are less likely to be narcissists. Some of them can. More avoidance can be narcissists because they have a hard time just taking in emotional content. And that somehow means that you are seeing something wrong with me. And I've created such a facade to make people think that I'm great, that if you start cracking away at that, I'm going to be defensive.
I find it fascinating when people say things, now that we've talked and learned, and people are talking about narcissism so much more recently. They'll be like, I wonder if I'm dating I think my person is a narcissist. And I'm thinking to myself, well, we don't know how to diagnose this. But just the thought would suggest that maybe you should leave. Why do we find ourselves not doing the obvious in those situations where we're talking to our friends and calling in and being like, am I dating a toxic, narcissistic person? And I'm like, I don't know, but you like, it sounds like you're dating a selfish person who maybe they're at a bad time of their life where they feel really insecure and they're getting carried away with trying to get validation. But like, it seems like maybe they need to work on themselves. Why do we want to stay
we're back
in these,
to the pattern of working too hard. So, and here's the other thing. And Taylor, even in her song, she used the word shame, which is a really impactful word, because we can feel shame about our own emotional needs. Like, I am too needy. I'm too much. I felt this from other people. So I come into this relationship already feeling like not completely empowered or settled. So I'm going to think, well, maybe I can still make it work. And so to your point, like, why don't you just leave? Because I'm afraid of abandonment and I'm afraid to be alone. It's a much bigger deal than you think. I mean, I have definitely had clients or other people that said, it sounds so easy, just say to leave. It's the hardest thing in the world.
Sure.
And so it is oftentimes the avoidant person who ends up leaving the relationship, because the anxious person can't even imagine pulling the trigger on that.
Yeah, but they're capable of it.
Of course.
Because
of course.
again, when I was just like wondering, you're describing these two attachment styles, and 20-something me sounded like the way you're describing it, like anxious attachment to a T. Like I was like, there's no such thing as breaking up. My parents fought hard. This is what they taught me. My first love, it was like, I would be like, oh fuck, are you breaking up with me today or Thursday? You know, and eventually, I mean, it took me years, but like eventually I realized again what I was doing and my unwillingness to like accept that maybe this wasn't healthy for us and I needed to leave and be okay with being alone, and finally was able to do that. So I'd certainly empathize with the challenges, but yet being someone who has done it, do we just have to like take years like I took? I mean, I took so long to learn that tough lesson. Can anxious
speed it up?
Can anxious attachment people learn these tools to not, you know, like I talk about, like I missed out on so much in these moments while I was fighting for these relationships, and especially my first love. Mm-hmm. And when we would fight, or when she would break up with me, I would just get into my feelings and just obsess of like what I could do better, what I could work on. And why was I, you know, and I missed out on friends and families and experiences, mm-hmm. and it all in the name of love, and all because it was like too hard. You know, I tell this joke where my dad one day was just like, I'll never forget it. We're sitting at the kitchen table. He's just like, you're just going to have to get over it. And he was just at his wit's end with me, just being, you know, and I said to him, there's a better chance I'm going to fly. And I meant it. I meant that I was more likely to obtain a superpower that would cause me to levitate and fly than get over it and move on.
Thank you for sharing that, Nick. But we don't want to minimize how hard it is, right? I can totally feel that. I have had so many heartaches myself. But I do think that we can speed it up a bit. And so how can we? Well, we can learn secrets from the secure person, because not everybody is insecure. I want to put that in context. I call my secure person Secure Sophia. Secure doesn't feel this way. She doesn't. Sophia or Steve doesn't feel that, doesn't worry about abandonment, doesn't feel flooded, doesn't worry about being vulnerable. What they have is the power to stay calm in their body. So they don't race ahead. They feel the flutter, but they don't get so wrapped up in their own nervous system. Their nervous system is regulated, we call it. So they can kind of manage, and they're not having these highs and lows. Mm-hmm. Okay. They can also think rationally. And their story about love is a positive one, because the other problem, talking about like expectations and hurt, the anxious person has this story of it's only a matter of time before somebody disappoints me. And they carry all their hurt from relationship to relationship, as opposed to Secure Sophia or Steve says, you know, love like you've never been hurt. They don't take it all so personally. So I can enter into my next relationship and move on quicker, actually, with a sense of confidence. So I have a calm body. I have a story that's positive about love. I have a calm mindset. I teach people mindset tools. And I can then actually act with confidence, which means if Dylan came to me and he was overreacting, I'd say, dude, what are you doing? I don't know if you noticed, but you did look a little bit self-absorbed there and you didn't do much. And with objectivity, without my own overreaction, I could hold you to what you're doing. And now we're on to something. And then as a couple together, one secure person can actually really help the other person heal. And that's called earned attachment, where a couple then really co-regulates with each other, helps each other calm down, because that's what successful couples do. They help each other calm down, relax into the relationship, and now you have corrective experiences that counteract all the hundreds of thousands of negative experiences you had in your family growing up.
And how do you identify those things? Because that all sounds great. Sounds, yep, we all want that, right? And is it just a learned experience? Is it like, you know, because you're talking, it's just like, I feel like I have that now in my current relationship, depending on the fight or whatever. It might take longer to get there. Darlene taught me that if we're fighting for longer than 10 minutes, we just take a time out.
Time out is a great
because
tool.
we're just
That's
like,
right.
we're being our childlike selves, and not that we have to exercise these muscles all that often, thankfully. I'm thankful that for the first time in my romantic life that I have a partner who like what you described. It's like we do a better job of getting ourselves out of these insecurities and states than escalating them. And I feel like I just kind of got lucky, because I was like, oh, well, I found someone who like, but like, is it just a matter of like hiring slow, firing fast in terms of like when we're dating and out there and trying to find this person? Like, how do we identify whether we're dating someone that is anxious, attached, and has like work to do on themselves? Because like we want to be empathetic and being like, I don't know, I have work to do on me, and I'm not, how do I, you know what I'm saying?
Here's the thing, nobody's perfect. And sometimes I give people too much benefit of the doubt. I know for me as an anxious person, I would give people too many chances. But if I was more Sophia and I had a model and I knew that there was a secure person out there and I could model after her and be more objective in these conversations and these touch points, then I think I could have just weeded through them faster and had less heartache. So I've been doing this psychotherapy for over 20 years, and I've really just identified this 4-step model. Like, these are the key things. And we know it's called bottom-up healing, which means from your brainstem up. It is your nervous system. It is the way that you think, and you have to work at them. Rinse, wash, and repeat. It's like doing therapy, doing training for your body to get stronger. Because again, the players are out there. If even gross, there's 10 to 15% of people who are narcissists. We used to think it was 1% narcissistic personality disorder, which is very severe. But if 10 to 15% are in this realm, you've got to just be fast enough and quick enough and limble enough.
That's actual narcissists, or people who, like, is it
on the spectrum?
On the spectrum.
That's right. So, but that's a lot more than you think.
Yeah.
So if you write a room of 10 people, pay attention. So what
Maybe
I say,
two people could be narcissists.
That's right. So I say, pay attention. Notice yourself, but work on yourself. Because if you're going from relationship to relationship just to avoid the feelings of loneliness, you have to be so certain with yourself to get to that point. And we can save some people. The fact that we're even having this podcast, we can save some people, you and I, in our experiences, my clinical experiences, to help them move through this faster. But if you feel stuck, you're not stuck. You're scared. Identify, we call it name it to tame it. Identify your fears. I'm scared. And think through that. I've been through this before. I've done hard things before. I can do it again. But my gut is telling me I'm never going to get my needs met with this person. I need to actually be in a relationship that's easier. But here's the other thing. Secure functioning people are sometimes boring. Right? They are.
No, yeah.
And so we go, oh my God, I want like a secure Steve. He's so like great. I'm like, he's not going to love bomb you. It's kind of boring.
We all joke. I think we've all been there in relationships. I've had it in my relationships. Even like Natalie and I will joke sometimes where, you know, we are aware of it, yes. But it was be like, let's fight about how much we love each other. You know, in a playful way, we make these jokes, right? You're right. Like, we have to acknowledge that the reason why we loved The Notebook so much, it was because it seemed exciting. I want a guy who's going to threaten to kill himself on a Ferris wheel so that I go on a date with him. Like, that's romantic. And we watched it.
And he's doing all of these grand gestures. And we do have to normalize it and say, that is not love. That is infatuation. That is too much. Again, back to, he wants to avoid his own anxious feelings of ambivalence that you'll put him through otherwise. And so you have to look at underlying this. But my advice is always, you know, get help, get therapy, talk to other people, be more objective, be your own objective person, write in your journal, go through all of these things. And the best advice is look for patterns. These aren't one-offs. That's why it's so hard to just analyze a one-off and say, what is that? It's more of the bigger pattern that we're looking for.
For the person who's in their first love, because the first seems to always be the hardest to get over, because I don't know, in my experience, you just don't know the difference. It was easier to get over my second heartbreak because even though it hurt as much and maybe even more in the moment, I was like, I have gotten over this before. And I don't know how I'm going to get over it this time, but I do know it's possible. And just that thought alone was incredibly beneficial to me. But for the person who doesn't have that perspective or foresight, who is afraid of being alone, are there tools or reminders to give them the encouragement they might need to take that leap of faith for themselves and face that fear of being alone when they know deep down that maybe this isn't the healthiest relationship for them?
Well, the data says that quick break relationships that go no contact are easier to get over than the ones that go on and on.
Oh,
and
sure,
part of this relationship is the tearing off the Band-Aid again and again, and then the expectations. And it's like the heart needs time to heal. Okay. So in grief, your heart just needs time to heal. Be gentle with yourself. Be compassionate. Do lovely things. Take a trip that you would have never gone with your ex. Create novel experiences. Surround yourself with fun, happy people. Try a new hobby. Go back to graduate school. Do something different
Invest
for
in
you.
yourself, yeah.
Invest in yourself to get over your ex. Then it's not so scary because you're going to be less likely to throw yourself back into the next relationship. So grief is grief. We wish that went along faster or was smoother. Yeah. You're going to have your ups and downs. The bargaining stage is where, like, if I talk to him, maybe if he's in therapy, and how about this, and how about that?
We bargain with ourselves a lot in those moments.
Too much bargaining. He wasn't your person. I was
really good at bargaining with myself.
Right?
Like at dangerous levels when I was younger. Well, if I just, you know what, I could put up with this. You know what, this is okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's fun that she did this to me. It's okay. Yeah.
You'll do anything to get that hit again because it is a biochemical thing. It's dopamine, serotonin. You get that hit of love. It is chemically something that's happened.
Do you think people can be addicted to that feeling of getting back together with their ex? Like it becomes this thing that
it's not your typical addiction. If we look at that, that's questionable about love addiction. But in the brain, what's happening, your brain looks like you have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Your brain is circulating on the same thought again and again and again. And the feeling of obsessing over having that dopamine, serotonin rush again is powerful. Yes.
Yeah.
It can drive you to overlook a lot of negative behaviors. But if you're in a calmer state, if you've done your healing, if you recognize that's my anxious attachment, that's my avoidant attachment, if you work through that and then actually practice new behaviors, you're never going to go back. It's only going to be up, and now you're going to have more skills for the next person.
And again, as someone who's lived it and done it, it's like, yeah, I sometimes wish I could talk to younger me, and like,
I know.
You know, it's tough, but it's a real challenge to try to, especially the first time, your excitement levels and then part of us is we just want to enjoy falling in love. You're like, you meet someone, you're like, oh shit, all right, well, what do I need to be aware of? Go again. You know, like sometimes you just want to get in the car and drive.
It's a great feeling, right? So know that you're stronger than you think. Know that you can handle it. Again, nobody can anticipate other grief, and you'll get through it because you have to.
Yeah, we're always so afraid to move on, and we're stronger than we think in that case, and yet we're so willing to continue to hurt ourselves through our whatever it's stubbornness or our fear, like that fear of moving on. Also turns in this willingness to like keep taking these metaphorical punches with our insecurities being triggered, our emotions being, you know, feeling like we're not ourselves. Just like I think we all have been in relationships where you wake up, you're miserable. We've stayed in miserable relationships for so long. And it's just like that, take that strength that you've shown or that ability to endure this pain and apply it to just being alone. I don't know.
Well, I do love Taylor's, the quote is, love is short, forgetting is long. And also that phrase that we don't have the ending yet. You don't know your end story. And it all makes sense in the end. We're not there yet. Like if I had known, if someone could have had a crystal ball and told me, oh, Diane, this is going to be one in a series of many, you would look at it differently. But in the moment, you don't have that perspective. Yeah. So that's what we can tell our younger selves, younger people, that your story's not over yet. You're just beginning. And if you can look at it and say, what can I learn from it? What can I grow? And that was me. And I did these things. And next time I'm going to check in with myself and do these things differently. Then you've actually made something of it.
One thing about the music video that maybe this is just the film school in me, but like the blocking for the fight scene felt very, very like it illuminated what was happening, which is like they were both cleaning up the kitchen and she was there scrubbing plates.
Yes.
And he was going and getting the plates and he kept putting them in the sink. So she had more and more plates to scrub. And it feels like that was kind of, in terms of like, why is it so hard to walk away from this emotional labor, is because I think in that moment you're insecure and you just want to get the thing done. You just want to clean all the plates. You just want to get through this fight. And you're so focused on like getting the task done it's hard. I think sometimes that can, and you know that your partner isn't helping you maybe the way you want to, but you just want the kitchen to be clean. You just want to get it done. And then you kind of lose sight of like how futile it might be.
That's that challenge too, because we've been told either by our parents or by TV or movies that love is pain and that we have to like be willing to fight and work, and it's in our vows, and things like that. And obviously those are all true things. No marriage is perfect. We have to go through ups and downs, right? We have to endure, but it's finding that balance between what is acceptable and holding and setting our own boundaries in our relationships, holding ourselves accountable, enforcing those boundaries, and then accepting them from our partners versus taking on all that weight of the relationship because I can,
because you're determined to make it work.
You're like, I've decided this is going to be my relationship and I'll make it. Yeah. Like, and
let's face it, there's nothing harder than a relationship, because a relationship, you're only responsible for 50%, right? My career, I can work hard and I'm responsible for 100% of that. But that is the frustration, because no matter how hard you decide, it's got to be two people committed to it. But yes, we have this analogy that relationships are work. What they are is time. I say a good judge of a relationship is it's easy, not hard, right? If you're working too hard at the beginning, you put energy into sustaining the love and quality time together, in having date nights and doing special things, but it shouldn't be that hard. And if it is, it's not a good sign.
My favorite quote is, relationships are like farts. If you have to try too hard, it's probably shit.
I love it.
Allie coming in with a good fart joke.
Love that. Gotta quote you.
So that is something I had to learn for myself. It took me a while. And because younger me, there was no, if it was work and I was willing to do it, it was special. Mm-hmm. As opposed to understanding the difference between, like you said, the hard work should be going into continuing what is already great and maintaining, because that is hard work, especially for a lifetime, not constantly fixing something that's never even worked properly. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you're secure functioning together, then there's so much more energy to do other things, because, right, if one person's super emotional, it's taking up a lot of the energy of the relationship to manage the insecurity. So again, couples therapy is another way to move beyond that, to now you've made a good investment. This person is good for you. Then you want to maintain that, and you might need some help about it.
And before we wrap, can you define stonewalling for us?
Stonewalling is another way of blocking. Like, I give you something and you block me and you say no. It could be like eye rolling. One of the other signs of a relationship, if you ever notice this, if you ever see anyone eye rolling, you talk to them and they go, roll their eyes, be very careful.
I heard that's a number one reason why relationships don't work out, eye rolling.
It's dismissive, right? Yeah. I mean, it's if someone's talking to you and they roll your eyes, it's a horrible feeling. So these are just diverting ways, right? I give you something, you don't listen. So everyone makes mistakes, to our point earlier. We all have moments of that where we could be considered toxic, where a piece of our behavior could look really negative. But it's how the partner responds in the repair that's crucial. How, if I come to you and say, I was really hurt because of this, how do you receive me now? Do you get defensive and stonewall me? Or do you open your heart and say, yeah, I could see that? So one's workable and one isn't.
What is the appropriate amount of patience for, again, because like depending on the day that we had, things going on, our emotional kind of state of mind going into a fight can all impact how we go about a fight, right? So what is the appropriate amount of patience for your partner if you feel like, okay, wait, this feels like stonewalling, versus and checking that versus like how much rope should we give our partners like, is it, or if they stonewall all the time, I'm in a toxic abusive relationship versus like someone having a bad day and feeling stonewalled?
Well, so back to the point earlier that we talked about even gaslighting. I'm very careful to ever use these clinical terms with anyone. I'm not going to tell my husband, you're gaslighting me or you're stonewalling me.
Should we stop using that in our relationships?
I think we should. I think we should actually keep them for significant situations where there's a pattern. And even then, the person's not going to give me the validation I need. Then I might need to talk to a therapist about all of these sets of behaviors and then make my own decision. But if I say to you, you're gaslighting me, where are we going to go with that? Because you're going to feel blocked. You're going to feel like, wow, I'm this horrible person. It's not a conversation opener. So let's be careful. Let's just speak to your own feelings. I'm feeling hurt. I'm feeling invalidated. And make a request. So in couples therapy, I say a complaint is different than a request. A request is, hey, next time, could we do it differently? Could you hold my hand? Could we do these things? A complaint is you always, you never, how come? There's a very different vibe to it.
Always, never stuff. It's always.
That's right.
I hate it. It's
so speak to your own lived experiences and make a request for something else. That's great communication.
Final question before we go. And we have a big audience of women that we obviously, I love and adore. You're my audience. I'm always trying to be empathetic with my audience, and this show has helped me in my relationships and myself. It does feel like, and maybe it's because women are more in touch with their feelings and seem to be more willing to be more empathetic, or maybe they're interested in these phrases, but it does feel like the gaslighting, the love bombing, the stonewalling, it seems like the perception is that it's exclusive to men doing it to women. And is that just a result of women paying attention to these terms more? But in heterosexual relationships, I think we're often doing it to each other, or no?
Well, there could be equal numbers of women who are gaslighting. I think if the man's more emotional and he interprets it, what her behavior, and that's what she's doing, it's not really gender specific, but the women tend to feel more fear of men as opposed to men feeling afraid of women, just biologically. Yeah. So that's why I think we see the emphasis more on women holding on to these terms, because there is more idea of threat that I could be hurt by a man physically or otherwise, as opposed to men don't recognize that as much.
That makes sense.
And I feel like that's why, like, if the power of naming something, where it's like feeling like connected and just feeling like so much of the time it's like you're feeling unvalidated. So I think in some ways it's validating having a term that feels like it is encompassing an experience. Well, but then of course the debate is like, but if you are using that term to describe a lesser like thing on the spectrum of that experience, like, are you diluting the term? Or
creating new problems in the relationship? Because you're right. Because that's the thing is, someone DM'd me and I thought stated it well, is that like, there's a reason why these terms are being so rapidly adapted, because I think there's a lot of people, and especially women in these relationships, for the first time feel like they can identify this behavior.
Because by definition, it's so sneaky and it's so easy for you to write off and say, no, I'm being dramatic, I'm being XYZ. And so, to have like, for the first time, it feel like, oh, we're all talking about this specific thing and we understand what it is.
Sure. I think hindsight is 2020, but it's also very dangerous to go back and just be like, well, this was how, like, I have a very one-sided opinion of all my relationships. It's my side. Right. And I can try to empathize with my exes and things like that. But like, I think, again, my concern sometimes with these terms is it helps us identify with these behaviors and makes us feel seen. But I think it does a lot of what we talked about this past hour is how do we hold ourselves more accountable to help us put ourselves in these healthier situations.
Sure. It's the same thing like attachment styles. If I label it, then I understand. I have a name for it. It's called my anxiety. It's my nervousness. Then I can actually cure my nervousness. If I label it as this is a behavior and we can all agree that it's a negative, toxic behavior. But then the question is, as I look at it from a couple's perspective, then what to do with it? Then do I raise it? But I have to get back to making a request what I want different. I have to own and talk about my experience, because if I don't tell you how I'm feeling, I can't expect you magically to mind read and fix it.
Yeah.
So I'm always thinking about, okay, let's identify it. And then if it keeps happening, then that's a whole different level.
Yeah, because almost like the identify helps you feel seen, but it also, in some ways, it feels like it like almost alleviates any of the role you're playing it.
That's right.
In a sense, it's like, oh well, you were doing this, and I guess then I'm good, because if you were doing that, then I couldn't have been doing anything wrong.
Yeah, or even if we go back to like narcissism, so I have to hold myself accountable. Like, well, how am I being attracted to all of these? How am I allowing these people into my life? What am I doing? It's not just like, oh, yet another narcissist. What do I do with that? Right?
Yeah.
Now I have to then take it in and say, what do I need to do to react differently, or how to respond, or teach other people then what ownership do you play in that?
Yeah. Well, Dr. Diane, we could go on forever, but we do have to wrap it up. As always, thank you so much. I hope that you guys learned. I know I learned a lot, and I hope you guys found this enjoyable, not only fun, talking about a cultural relevant topic, but also informative, because, I mean, these are just some of the things that we constantly get wrong, constantly are working on, trying to get right. And I think we're all just trying to find that relationship that makes us feel
that it's worth it.
Good and worth it and healthy and happy and comfortable and secure and all those wonderful things. Please let my audience know where they can find you on social media, or look you up, or work with you if that's something that they're interested in doing.
Sure. I work with people in California, though, because that's where my license is. But I'm Dr. Diane Strachowski, the Back to Love doc, BACKTOLOVE doc. And if they want to take my quiz, all they have to do is send the word love to 33777, and you will get instant access to my quiz, and you can find out if you are a nervous Nora or a secure Sophia or Steve. And then I do have online programs for people to actually help them work through these 4 steps.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We will be back. Don't forget to send your questions at asknick@castmedia.com, cast with the K for Ask Nick episodes. Next week, we are back with the wonderful Bachelorette, Michelle. She will be in studio, and we'll get an update on that, her life, hopefully a chance to get to know Michelle the person better and not just the Bachelorette. And be sure to check that out next Wednesday. Until then, have a great day. Hey guys, thanks for watching, but before you go, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you don't miss any future videos, like our Mondays Ask Nick for your favorite relationship stories and advice, and our Tuesday Bachelor recaps. See you next time.